I wasn't looking for another woman. That was the promise I'd made to myself, a vow sealed in packing tape and cardboard dust as I'd emptied my city apartment, shedding the ghost of a life that no longer fit. I had come to this cabin, nestled deep in a fold of the mountains where the nearest neighbor was a rumor and the Wi-Fi was a prayer, to be utterly and completely alone. Solitude was meant to be the cure, the poultice for a wound carved into me by a love that had promised forever and delivered an eviction notice for the heart. Chloe had been a supernova, brilliant and consuming, and when she'd burned out, she'd left nothing but a cold, dark vacuum in her wake. I had decided, with the grim finality of a survivor, that I was done with the gravitational pull of other people, especially women who smelled like expensive perfume and unspoken apologies. Here, the air smelled of damp earth and pine, honest and uncomplicated. The only promises were the ones the coming storm clouds made to the thirsty ground, and the only heartbreak was the ache in my muscles from hauling firewood. The cabin was small, more of a sturdy suggestion than a house, with a wide stone fireplace that looked like it had been wrestling with the mountain for a century, and won. Its windows faced a dense stand of hemlock and fir, a living wall that muted the world. For 2 weeks, this had been my sanctuary. I wrote, I walked, I drank too much tea and listened to the silence, relearning the shape of myself without another person pressed up against my edges. I was beginning to feel the first fragile shoots of peace. I was beginning to believe I could do this life of one. Then the sky turned the color of a bruise. The wind, which had been a whisper all afternoon, began to howl, a mournful, angry sound that rattled the old window panes. The rain came not in drops, but in sheets, a solid wall of water that blurred the forest into an impressionist painting of green and gray. I lit a fire, the crackle and pop a comforting counterpoint to the storm's fury. I told myself I was safe. I told myself I was prepared. I told myself I was alone, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth, a flicker of the lights, a groan from the ancient timbers of the roof, and then a sound that was not the storm. It was a violent, splintering crack, a sound of immense weight and finality, followed by a deafening crash that seemed to shake the very foundation of the cabin. The lights went out, plunging me into a darkness broken only by the frantic, dancing light of the fire. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of my own making. Something had fallen. Something was broken, and I was completely, terrifyingly on my own. Or so I thought. The first few hours after the crash were a blur of adrenaline and fear. Armed with a heavy-duty flashlight, I'd surveyed the damage. A massive oak, a patriarch of the forest, had surrendered to the wind, its heavy boughs smashing the corner of the porch and tearing a ragged gash in the roof above it. Rain was already dripping into the small utility room, a steady, rhythmic torture. The driveway was completely blocked by the fallen trunk, a barricade of splintered wood and tangled branches. My car was trapped. I was trapped. There was no cell service. The landline was dead, and the sense of isolation I had so desperately craved now felt like a shroud. I spent the night on the sofa in front of the fire, jumping at every creak of the house, my mind a carousel of worst-case scenarios. I thought of Chloe, of how she would have hated this. She would have called it rustic and grim, her perfect brows furrowed in distaste. The thought, meant to be a comfort, only amplified my loneliness. The memory of her was a phantom limb, an ache for something that was no longer there. By morning, the storm had exhausted itself, leaving behind a world washed clean and utterly broken. A weak, watery sunlight filtered through the trees, illuminating the devastation. The air was thick with the scent of pine needles and wet earth. I was trying to work up the courage to assess the roof again when I heard it, the low, guttural growl of an engine. It was distant at first, then closer, a sound so alien in my cocoon of silence that I froze. It stopped somewhere down the lane, followed by the slam of a car door. Then, silence again, but a different kind. A silence that was being listened to. I grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace, my hand slick with sweat. My mind conjured images of opportunistic looters, of strangers taking advantage of the storm's chaos. I crept to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. A figure was moving through the debris field that was once my driveway, navigating the fallen branches with a steady, unhurried grace. It was a woman. She was tall, dressed in practical dark green waterproofs and sturdy boots. A thick dark braid hung down her back, swaying with her movements. She carried a chainsaw in one hand, as if it were a briefcase. As she got closer, I could see the determined set of her jaw, the way her eyes scanned the damage to the cabin with a professional, assessing gaze. She wasn't a threat. She was competence, personified. She reached the edge of the ruined porch and stopped, her head tilted as if listening. She must have seen the flicker of my movement behind the glass, because her gaze lifted and met mine. I flinched, stepping back from the window. My heart was still pounding, but the fear was being replaced by something else, something far more complicated, a prickly, defensive shame at being so helpless. I didn't want help. I didn't want a witness to my failure to be a rugged, self-sufficient island. A moment later, a firm knock echoed on the front door. 3 solid raps. Not timid, not aggressive, just there. I took a deep breath, put the poker down, and opened the door a crack. The woman stood on my doorstep, rain dripping from the brim of her hood. Up close, her face was all strong lines and clear, steady eyes the color of moss after a rain. There were faint lines around them, crinkles of laughter or squinting into the sun. She wasn't smiling, but her expression wasn't unkind. "Morning," she said. Her voice was low and calm, with a slight rasp to it, like stones tumbling in a riverbed. It was a voice that didn't need to be raised to be heard. "Name's Maeve. I look after a few of the properties up here. Saw the oak was down. You all right in there?" I clutched the edge of the door, my knuckles white. "Ah, I'm fine," I said, the words clipped and unwelcoming. It was a lie, and we both knew it. The dark circles under my eyes and the frantic energy humming off me were a dead giveaway. Maeve's gaze drifted past me, to the water-stained ceiling visible in the entryway. She didn't comment on it. She just nodded slowly, her eyes returning to mine. "Road's washed out about a mile down. Looks like you and I are neighbors for a bit. The tree needs to be cleared before it does more damage to your foundation. And that roof needs a tarp before the next front moves in this afternoon." It wasn't a question or an offer. It was a statement of fact. She was assessing, planning, taking control of a situation that had completely overwhelmed me, and every independent, stubborn cell in my body rebelled against it. I had come here to prove I didn't need anyone. I didn't need a man to fix things, and I certainly didn't need a capable, calm-voiced woman with moss-green eyes reminding me of my own inadequacy. "I can handle it," I said, my chin jutting out. Another lie. I wouldn't know where to begin with a chainsaw, and the idea of getting on that slick, damaged roof made my stomach clench. Maeve looked at me, really looked at me, for a long moment. There was no judgment in her gaze, only a quiet patience that was somehow more unnerving than pity. She seemed to see right through the brittle facade to the exhausted, terrified woman underneath. Then she gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "All right," she said, her voice still even. "My truck's just down past the washout. I've got tools, tarps, and a thermos of coffee that's still hot. I'll just be clearing the lane. You give a shout if you change your mind." She turned and walked away without another word, leaving me standing in the doorway, the cool, damp air washing over me. I watched her go, her stride long and confident. She wasn't pushing, wasn't insisting. She was simply there, An offer left on the table, a lifeline I was too proud to take. I closed the door, the click echoing in the silent house. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, my bravado crumbling into dust. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle any of it. And the quiet competence of the woman outside, the simple, warm offer of a cup of coffee, felt like both an insult and a salvation. The friction between my pride and my desperation was a grinding, miserable thing. And through it all, a traitorous part of my mind kept replaying the image of her eyes, the sound of her voice, and the infuriating, undeniable sense of safety she projected. I hated it, and I wanted more of it than I dared to admit. I spent the next hour in a state of useless, prideful defiance. I made a list: find bucket, mop floor, assess roof. The list was a joke. The dripping from the utility room ceiling had become a steady stream, the bucket filling with alarming speed. Every time I looked out the window, I could hear the distant rhythmic buzz of Maeve's chainsaw, a steady, productive sound that mocked my own inertia. She was working. She was fixing things. I was pacing and making pointless lists. The smell of coffee I'd imagined earlier haunted me, a phantom of warmth and comfort. My pride was a flimsy shield, and it was beginning to crack. The truth was I was cold, I was tired, and the scope of the problem was terrifying. This wasn't a leaky faucet or a blown fuse. This was structural. It was big. It was beyond me. My escape from the world had become a prison, and Maeve, the stranger with the chainsaw, was the only one with a key. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. The sound of the chainsaw had stopped, and the silence that followed was somehow louder, more expectant. Swallowing the bitter pill of my own stubbornness, I pulled on my boots, grabbed a jacket, and stepped outside. The air was cool and clean. The world felt raw, stripped bare by the storm. I walked down the driveway, my feet sinking into the soft mud. The massive oak lay like a fallen giant across the path. A neat section, wide enough for a person to walk through, had been cut from the trunk. Maeve was standing by her truck, an old, slightly battered dark blue pickup that looked as sturdy and reliable as she did. She was wiping her hands on a rag, her back to me. I started, and my voice came out as a pathetic croak. She turned, not seeming surprised to see me. She leaned against the side of her truck, crossing her arms over her chest. The waterproofs were unzipped, revealing a worn gray Henley underneath. "Change your mind?" she asked. There was no "I told you so" in her tone. It was a simple, direct question. I nodded, feeling a hot flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. "Yes, I can't do this on my own. The roof." "I know," she said simply. She pushed off the truck and walked to the back, lowering the tailgate. It was a mobile workshop. Tools were arranged in neat, orderly boxes: ropes, chains, a heavy-duty tarp. "First thing is to stop the water getting in. Then we can worry about clearing the rest of this." She pulled out the large, folded blue tarp. "You good with heights?" "No," I admitted, my voice small. "Didn't think so," she said, and for the first time the corner of her mouth quirked up in a ghost of a smile. It transformed her face, softening the severe lines. "All right, I'll go up. I need you on the ground. I'll throw you a line and you'll feed the tarp up to me when I'm ready. Can you do that?" "Yes," I said, grateful for a task, for a role to play no matter how small. "I can do that." For the next 2 hours we worked, or rather Maeve worked, and I assisted. She moved with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing to watch. She secured a ladder, scaled it with practiced ease, and moved across the slick, treacherous roof as if she were born to it. Her instructions to me were clear and concise. "Pull it taut. A little more to the left. Hold it there." I did as I was told, my eyes fixed on her form silhouetted against the gray sky. I was acutely aware of her, the flex of muscle in her back as she pulled the heavy tarp into place, the low, reassuring murmur of her voice as she guided me, the way she never once made me feel foolish for my inexperience or my fear. We fell into a rhythm, a silent partnership born of necessity. The external world, my past, Chloe, all of it faded into the background, replaced by the immediacy of the task. There was only the slick rope in my hands, the steady weight of the tarp, and the reassuring presence of the woman on my roof. When she was finally done, the blue tarp was a neat, secure patch against the dark shingles, held down with sandbags she'd hauled up. She climbed down the ladder, her face smudged with dirt, her braid coming loose around her temples. "That'll hold for now," she said, pulling off her work gloves and tucking them into her back pocket. "Should keep you dry." "Thank you," I said, the words feeling inadequate. I don't know how to thank you." "A hot cup of coffee would be a good start," she said, that small smile appearing again. "And then we should talk about getting this beast off your driveway." She gestured with her chin toward the fallen oak. The "we" hung in the air between us. It wasn't my problem anymore. It was ours. The storm had passed, but now a different kind of front was moving in. The road was still impassable. The power was still out. And this capable, quiet woman was, for all intents and purposes, stranded here with me. The forced proximity I'd been dreading was now a reality. And the walls I had so carefully constructed around my heart felt perilously thin. Inside, the cabin was cold. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the chill of the storm had seeped into the very bones of the house. While I fumbled with the old percolator on the gas stove, Maeve knelt before the fireplace. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, a reluctant observer of her quiet competence. She didn't fuss or struggle. She simply laid new logs on the embers, her movements sure and practiced. Her hands, I noticed, were strong and calloused, but her fingers were long and surprisingly graceful as she arranged the kindling. They were hands that knew how to build, how to fix, how to create warmth from nothing. Chloe's hands had been for typing emails and holding champagne flutes. The contrast was a sudden, sharp pang in my chest. "You've got a good draft in this chimney," Maeve commented, not looking up from her work. "Pulls well." A small flame licked at the dry kindling, then caught, growing steadily into a confident blaze. She sat back on her heels, watching it for a moment, a flicker of the firelight dancing in her mossy eyes. "The real estate agent said it was the heart of the home," I said, my attempt at a light-hearted tone falling flat in the quiet room. Maeve grunted, a sound that could have been amusement or agreement. Agents say a lot of things, but they're not wrong about that. She rose to her feet, brushing sawdust from the knees of her pants. She moved around the small living space not like a guest, but like someone comfortable in her own skin, someone who belonged in places like this. She ran a hand over the rough-hewn mantelpiece, her touch gentle, appreciative. "Good, solid oak. You don't see work like this much anymore." Her presence filled the room, not in an overwhelming way, but in a steady, grounding one. The silence that had felt so oppressive before now felt different. It was a shared silence, comfortable. I brought over 2 steaming mugs of coffee. I didn't have any cream or sugar to offer, just black and strong. "Hope this is okay," I said, handing one to her. Our fingers brushed as she took the mug. Her skin was cool from being outside, a stark contrast to the heat of the ceramic. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a tiny jolt up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if burned. I saw her notice my reaction, a flicker of something, curiosity, in her eyes before she masked it. "Black is perfect," she said, her voice a low rumble. "Thank you." We sat in the 2 worn armchairs in front of the fire, the heat slowly beginning to push back the cabin's chill. The only sounds were the crackle of the logs and the gentle hiss of the rain, which had started up again, a soft drumming on the new tarp overhead. I clutched my mug, the warmth seeping into my cold hands. I should have been on edge, trapped with a stranger, but instead, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. It was Maeve. She was an anchor in the storm, both literally and figuratively. "So," she said, after a few minutes of comfortable silence, her gaze fixed on the flames. "What brings a city person all the way out here? Running from something?" The question was direct, but her tone was gentle, devoid of accusation. It was a simple inquiry. Still, my defenses shot up. "I'm a writer," I said, a half-truth. "I needed quiet to finish a project." She took a sip of her coffee, her eyes still on the fire. "Finding your quiet?" "I was," I said, the words catching in my throat. "Until the tree." "Sometimes the quiet gets too loud," she said, a simple, profound statement that struck me with the force of a physical blow. She turned her head and looked at me then, her gaze steady and knowing. It felt like she could see the cacophony of memories and regrets I'd been trying to outrun. "Sometimes you need a tree to fall down to shake things up." My carefully constructed wall of solitude began to crumble. This woman, this stranger, saw me. Not the writer, not the new owner of the cabin, but the person underneath. A person who was hiding. A flicker of vulnerability, raw and terrifying, sparked within me. I wanted to shut it down, to change the subject, to retreat back into my shell. But the warmth of the fire, the strength of the coffee, and the quiet acceptance in her eyes held me in place. "Maybe," I whispered, my gaze dropping to the swirling liquid in my mug. "Maybe I did." It wasn't a confession, not really, but it was a crack in the facade. It was the first honest thing I'd said to her, and the admission hung in the warm, firelit air between us. Maeve didn't press. She just nodded, as if I'd confirmed something she already knew, and turned her attention back to the fire. The rain pattered on the roof, a gentle, insistent rhythm. The power was out, the road was gone, and I was trapped in a cabin with a woman whose quiet presence was beginning to feel more like a sanctuary than a prison. And that, more than anything, scared the hell out of me. The day bled into a long, slow afternoon. The rain was a constant, soft percussion on the roof, a reminder of our shared confinement. We fell into a strange domestic rhythm. Maeve, discovering my woodpile was woefully inadequate, took an axe to the smaller limbs of the fallen oak, splitting wood with an efficiency that was both impressive and, to my city-soft sensibilities, deeply attractive. I watched from the kitchen window as I rummaged through my meager pantry, trying to cobble together a meal. The swing of the axe, the clean thwack as the wood split, the easy strength in her shoulders. It was all so elemental, so real. It made my world of deadlines and drafts feel flimsy and intangible. I found a can of chili and some stale crackers. It was pathetic, but it was all I had. When Maeve came back inside, her cheeks flushed from the cold air and exertion, her hair damp with mist, I felt a pang of inadequacy. "It's just chili," I said apologetically, stirring the pot on the stove. "Smells good," she said, shrugging off her damp jacket and hanging it by the door. She washed her hands at the kitchen sink, the simple act feeling intimate in the small space. The scent of pine and rain and something uniquely her, a clean, earthy scent like sawdust and ozone, filled the kitchen. It was intoxicating. It was dangerous. Food is food when you're hungry. We ate sitting on the floor by the fire, using the low coffee table as our dining surface. The flickering light cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the small cabin feel like the only place in the world. The chili was mediocre at best, but the shared warmth and the quiet company made it feel like a feast. "So, a writer," Maeve said, breaking the silence. "What do you write?" I hesitated. Talking about my work felt like bearing a piece of my soul, especially now, when the well of inspiration had run so dry. Novels, I said finally. Or, I used to. I'm stuck. Stuck how? She asked, her fork scraping the last of the chili from her bowl. I looked into the fire, the flames hypnotic. I write romance novels, I confessed, the words feeling foolish in the face of her rugged practicality. And I think I've forgotten how to believe in it. The admission cost me something. It was the heart of my problem, the secret shame I'd been nursing in this self-imposed exile. Chloe had not just broken my heart, she'd broken my faith in the very thing I built my career on. She'd made a cynic out of a believer. Maeve was quiet for a long moment. I braced myself for a dismissive grunt, for a change of subject. Instead, she said, "It's hard to write about a place you can't find on a map anymore." My head snapped up. I stared at her, my breath caught in my chest. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring into the fire, her expression unreadable, but her words had landed like a perfectly aimed arrow, piercing straight through my defenses to the wounded thing hiding beneath. She understood. Without knowing a single detail about Chloe or my past, she understood the landscape of loss. "How did you—" I started, my voice barely a whisper. She finally turned her head, her moss-green eyes meeting mine in the firelight. There was a deep well of sadness in them, a history I couldn't begin to guess at. "My wife, Anna," she said, her voice soft, the rasp more pronounced. "She passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. For a long time after, the whole world felt like it was written in a language I didn't speak anymore. The air left my lungs. The simple, devastating revelation hung between us, rearranging everything. This wasn't just a capable handywoman. This was a woman who had known a profound love and a profound loss. She was a fellow traveler in the land of grief. The vulnerability I had shown her was now being returned, a fragile gift offered in the dark. "I'm so sorry," I said, the words feeling hollow and useless. She gave a small, sad smile. "Me too." She looked away, back at the flames. "She loved this mountain. We were going to build a place up here, bigger than this. Had the spot all picked out." She paused, clearing her throat. "After she was gone, I couldn't leave. It's the last place that still feels like her." We sat in silence, the fire crackling in the space her confession had created. My own heartbreak, which had felt so monumental, so all-consuming, suddenly seemed smaller, contextualized by the sheer, irreversible finality of her loss. She hadn't been left. She had been bereaved. The quiet strength I had admired in her all day was not just an innate quality. It was forged in fire, tempered by grief. "Her name was Chloe," I said, the name feeling strange on my tongue after weeks of trying to swallow it down. "She didn't die. She just left, decided she wanted something else." Maeve nodded slowly. She didn't offer platitudes or easy comforts. She simply listened, her presence a quiet testament of shared understanding. "Sometimes that's its own kind of death," she said. And in that moment, sitting on the floor of a powerless cabin, trapped by a storm, I felt a connection to this woman that was deeper and more real than anything I had felt in years. The walls I had built were not just breached, they were dissolving. We were two women, wounded by love in different ways, finding a strange and unexpected solace in a shared darkness, illuminated only by the heart of the fire. The revelation of Maeve's past settled between us, changing the texture of the air. The space was no longer just a shared confinement. It was a place of shared grief. As the evening deepened, a comfortable quietness enveloped us. We cleaned up our simple meal, moving around each other in the small kitchen with an unspoken choreography. A brush of her arm against mine as she reached for a dish, a low murmur of, "Excuse me," as I passed behind her. Each small point of contact was a spark against the kindling of my awareness. I was hyper-conscious of her proximity, of the solid, grounding energy she radiated. Later, we sat by the fire again, the flames having burned down to a deep, mesmerizing glow. There were no distractions. No phones, no television, no world outside the cabin walls. There was only the fire, the sound of the rain, and the presence of the other woman. "So what happens now?" I asked, breaking the silence. My voice sounded small in the vast quiet. "Now we wait," Maeve said. "Road crew won't be able to even assess the washout until the rain stops for good. Could be a day, could be two." The thought of being here with her for 2 more days sent a strange, contradictory flutter through my stomach, a mix of apprehension and a startling, undeniable thread of hope. "I don't have There's only one bed," I said, the practical problem suddenly looming large. The words came out sounding more intimate than I'd intended. Maeve didn't miss a beat. "I've slept in worse places than a sofa," she said, gesturing to the worn couch. "Don't you worry about it." But I was worried. Not about her comfort, but about my own. The thought of her sleeping just a few feet away, of hearing her breathe in the dark, felt impossibly charged. I thought of Chloe, of how we used to lie awake and talk for hours. The memory was sharp, painful, and yet the idea of sharing that same quiet darkness with Maeve felt different. Not a replacement, but something new and terrifyingly fragile. To distract myself, I stood and pulled a thick quilt from the linen closet. "Here," I said, holding it out to her. "It gets cold in here at night." She stood to take it, and for a moment, we were standing close, the quilt a bridge between us. The firelight cast her face in warm tones, softening the strong lines of her jaw and deepening the shadows under her cheekbones. Her eyes, fixed on mine, were dark and unreadable. I could smell the wood smoke in her hair, the clean scent of her skin. My heart started to beat a heavy, slow rhythm. I felt an almost irresistible urge to lean in, to close the small distance between us, just to see what would happen. The air grew thick, charged with unspoken possibility. It was a moment stretched taut, a silence that held 1,000 questions. Her fingers brushed mine as she took the quilt. The touch lingered for a fraction of a second too long. It was a question in itself. Her gaze dropped to my mouth, then quickly back up to my eyes. I saw it then, a flicker of the same yearning I felt, a reflection of my own confused desire. The recognition was a silent, powerful current that passed between us. Neither of us moved. Neither of us breathed. The world shrank to this small space in front of the fire, to the inches that separated our bodies. Then, from outside, came the sharp crack of a falling branch, a sudden, jarring sound that broke the spell. We both flinched, stepping back. The moment was gone. Maeve cleared her throat, her gaze dropping to the quilt in her hands. "Thanks," she said, her voice a little rougher than before. "This'll be perfect." She turned and began to arrange the quilt on the sofa, her back to me. The casual, easy way we had been with each other was gone, replaced by a new crackling awareness. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. It wasn't just my imagination. She had felt it too. The recognition of attraction, stark and undeniable, had been laid bare in the firelight. It was a turn in the road, a point of no return. We were no longer just two strangers weathering a storm. We were two women, alone in the dark, who had just seen something in each other's eyes that would make it impossible to ever go back to the way things were before. The night ahead suddenly felt infinitely long and fraught with a new, terrifying, and exhilarating tension. The next morning, the world was shrouded in a thick, wet fog. The rain had finally stopped, but the air was heavy with moisture, dripping from the eaves and clinging to the pine needles. The silence was absolute. Maeve was already awake when I emerged from the bedroom, a fresh fire crackling in the hearth and the scent of coffee filling the cabin. She was standing at the window, staring out at the mist-shrouded trees, a mug cradled in her hands. She looked pensive, a little distant. The charged energy of the night before was still palpable, a low hum beneath the surface of the morning's quiet. "Morning," I said, my voice husky with sleep. She turned, a small polite smile on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Morning. Coffee's ready." Easy camaraderie of the previous day had been replaced by a careful, deliberate politeness. We moved around each other with a new consciousness, an invisible boundary line drawn between us. We were both acutely aware of what had passed between us in the firelight. That shared moment of recognition, that silent acknowledgement of a pull that was more than just circumstantial. And now, in the cold light of day, neither of us knew what to do with it. "I'm going to go take a look at the washout," she announced after we'd drunk our coffee in a mostly silent truce. "See if anything's changed." "I'll come with you," I said, the thought of being left alone in the cabin suddenly unbearable. I needed the distraction of movement, of a task. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. "All right, grab your boots, it'll be muddy." The walk down the lane was an exercise in tension. The fog was so thick we could barely see 20 feet ahead, the towering pines appearing as ghostly sentinels in the gray light. The only sounds were the squelch of our boots in the mud and the steady drip of water from the trees. We walked single file, Maeve in the lead, the space between us feeling both too large and too small. I found myself watching the sway of her braid, the confident set of her shoulders, the way she navigated the slick, uneven ground without a hint of hesitation. Every detail of her was magnified, my senses on high alert. The washout was worse than she described. A whole section of the gravel road had been carved away by the torrent of water, leaving a deep, impassable gully. The creek at the bottom was still running high and fast, a muddy, churning ribbon of brown. Maeve stood at the edge, hands on her hips surveying the damage. "Yeah," she said, her voice low. "No one's getting through that for a while. It'll take heavy equipment to fix." The finality in her voice sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me, but it was tangled with that same traitorous thread of relief. More time with her. It was on the walk back that my sister, Sarah, somehow managed to get a signal through. My phone, dead for 2 days, suddenly buzzed in my pocket with a frantic series of texts. And then it rang. The sound was jarringly loud in the profound silence of the woods. I saw Maeve glance back at me, her expression unreadable. "I should take this," I said, feeling a strange need to explain. I stepped off the path, turning my back to Maeve for a semblance of privacy. "Sarah, how are you getting through?" "Oh, thank God." Her voice was a high-pitched, frantic burst of city static in the calm of the forest. "Ilara, I've been calling and texting for 2 days. The news said there were massive storms in your area, washouts, power outages. I was picturing you crushed under a tree." "There was a tree," I said, my voice flat. "It hit the cabin. The road's gone." "Oh my God, are you okay? Are you alone? You need to get out of—" "There. I'm fine, Sarah, and I can't get out. I just told you the road is gone." I could feel a headache starting behind my eyes. Sarah's brand of love was a smothering, anxious cloud. "Well, what are you going to do? You can't just stay there. Is there anyone with you? Did you call for help?" I glanced over my shoulder. Maeve had stopped walking and was waiting for me a little further up the path, her back still to me, giving me space. But I could feel her presence, a solid, calming weight in the swirling fog of my sister's panic. "There's someone here," I said, lowering my voice. "The local ranger, she's helping." "She? Oh, is she—" "You know." Sarah's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. The question was unspoken, but clear. Is she like you? Is this going to be another Chloe? A hot, defensive anger flared in my chest. I have to go, Sarah. The signal's breaking up. It was a lie, but I couldn't bear the conversation, couldn't bear the intrusion of my past into this fragile, uncertain present. Wait, Alara, just be careful, okay? After everything with Chloe, I just don't want you to. I hung up, cutting her off mid-sentence. My hand was shaking. I stood for a moment, my back to Maeve, trying to calm the frantic thrumming in my veins. The call had been like a bucket of ice water, a harsh reminder of the world outside this misty bubble. A world where I was the woman who fell for the wrong women, the woman who got her heart broken, the woman her sister worried about. It brought all the old insecurities rushing back, the fear, the shame, the feeling of being fundamentally flawed. I took a deep breath and turned around. Maeve was watching me now, her expression concerned. She had heard, if not the words, then the tone. She knew that call had upset me. Everything all right? She asked, her voice gentle. Fine, I said, my voice tight. Just my sister. Worrying. I started walking again, faster this time, wanting to escape the conversation, to escape the pity I was sure I'd see in Maeve's eyes. But when she fell into step beside me, her presence was not pitying. It was just steady, solid, a quiet counterpoint to the chaos in my head. And I realized, with a sudden, gut-wrenching clarity, that I didn't want her to see me as the broken woman from the phone call. I wanted her to see me as the person I was starting to feel like here, with her. Someone capable, someone calm, someone who wasn't running anymore. The tension between who I was and who I wanted to be stretched between us, as thick and obscuring as the fog that surrounded us. The rest of the day was a study in avoidance. We busied ourselves with tasks that required focus, but not conversation. Maeve, with grim determination, began sectioning the massive trunk of the oak tree that blocked the driveway. The roar of the chainsaw was a welcome noise, filling the silence and obliterating the need for words. I threw myself into domestic chores with a frantic energy, scrubbing floors that were already clean, organizing my chaotic bookshelves, taking a detailed inventory of my dwindling food supplies. We were two celestial bodies, trapped in the same orbit, but carefully avoiding a collision, the gravitational pull between us growing stronger with every rotation. I strained my back, hauling a heavy box of books. I hadn't even realized it at first, a dull ache that I ignored, pushing through the discomfort. But by late afternoon, as I bent to add a log to the fire, a sharp, searing pain shot up my spine, stealing my breath and making me cry out. I froze, bent over, my hand pressed to the small of my back. Maeve, who had just come inside, shut down the chainsaw instantly. "What is it? What's wrong?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern as she crossed the room in two long strides. "It's nothing," I gasped, trying to straighten up and failing, another wave of pain making me wince. I just pulled something. "Here," she said, her voice softening. She was beside me, her hand hovering near my shoulder, not touching, but the warmth of her presence was palpable. "Easy. Let's get you to a chair." Her hand finally made contact, a firm, steady pressure on my arm, guiding me. The touch was electric. Every nerve ending in my body fired at once. She helped me ease into one of the armchairs, my movements stiff and painful. "Where does it hurt?" she asked, kneeling in front of me, her moss-green eyes filled with a gentle worry that made my throat tighten. "My lower back," I mumbled, embarrassed by my own fragility. "It's stupid. I was just lifting a box." "Not stupid," she corrected me gently. "Happens." She studied me for a long moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I have some liniment in my truck, a first aid kit. It might help. And I know a bit about massage." My wife Anna, she had terrible back pain near the end. I got pretty good at working out the knots. Her words hung in the air, a loaded offer. The mention of her wife made it both deeply intimate and strangely safe. This was something she did out of love, out of care. But the thought of her hands on me, on my bare skin, sent a cascade of heat and fear through my body. I don't know, I started, my voice weak. It's just a massage, Alara, she said, her voice low and reassuring, using my name for what felt like the first time. The sound of it on her lips was a revelation. It's just to help with the pain, nothing more. But her eyes said something else. Her eyes held the memory of the previous night, the firelight, the unspoken tension. We both knew it wouldn't be just a massage. It would be a crossing of a threshold we had been carefully avoiding all day. It was a surrender. I looked at her, kneeling before me, her expression open and sincere, offering comfort, offering her touch. And in that moment, the pain in my back was nothing compared to the ache of wanting, the deep, resonant yearning to let her in, to let her close. My fear and my pride were no match for it. I took a shaky breath and gave a single small nod. Okay. The word was a whisper, but it landed with the weight of a confession. Maeve's expression softened, a slow warmth spreading across her features. She gave my knee a brief, gentle squeeze, a gesture of reassurance that sent another tremor through me, before rising to her feet. I'll be right back, she said. Lie down on the floor, on the rug by the fire. It's better to be on a firm surface. My heart hammered against my ribs as I did as she asked, slowly, painfully lowering myself onto the thick braided rug in front of the hearth. The warmth of the fire radiated against my cheek. I was acutely aware of every sensation. The rough texture of the wool against my shirt, the crackle of the logs, the frantic pulse beating in my throat. I felt incredibly vulnerable, laid out like an offering. This was it. The dam was about to break. Maeve returned, carrying a small, well-worn canvas bag. She knelt beside me, the floorboards creaking under her weight. She opened the bag and took out a small, dark bottle, the air filled with the sharp, clean scent of wintergreen and eucalyptus. It was a scent of healing, of relief. All right, she said, her voice a low murmur close to my ear. I'm going to need you to take your shirt off, or at least pull it up. I hesitated for a heartbeat. Then, with fumbling fingers, I did as she asked, pulling the hem of my sweater and the t-shirt underneath it up to my shoulder blades, exposing my back to the warm, fire-lit air. I folded my arms under my head, my face turned away from her, my eyes squeezed shut. I heard her pour the liniment into her hands, the soft sound of her rubbing them together to warm it. The anticipation was an agony of its own. Then her hands touched my skin. The shock of it was breathtaking. Her hands were not soft, but they were not rough either. They were strong, warm, and confident. The calluses on her palms were a testament to a life of hard work, but her touch was incredibly gentle, almost reverent. She started at my shoulders, her thumbs pressing into the tight-knotted muscles there, working in slow, deliberate circles. A groan escaped my lips, a sound that was equal parts pain and release. "Am I hurting you?" she asked, her voice a soft rumble right beside me. "No," I breathed. "It's good." She moved lower, her palms smoothing the warm oil over the length of my back. Her touch was methodical, professional, and yet it was the most intimate thing I had ever experienced. She found the nexus of the pain in my lower back, her fingers probing gently at first, then with more pressure, seeking out the heart of the spasm. I flinched, a sharp intake of breath. "Easy," she murmured, her voice a soothing balm. "Just breathe through it. I've got you. I've got you." The words undid me. No one had had me in so long. I had been holding myself together with sheer will, a fragile construct of pride and fear. Under the steady healing pressure of her hands, it all began to crumble. A single tear escaped the corner of my eye, then another, tracing a hot path down my temple into my hair. I tried to stifle the sob that rose in my throat, but it was no use. It broke free, a ragged, wounded sound in the quiet room. Her hands stilled on my back. Alara. The dam broke. The grief for Chloe, the loneliness, the fear, the bone-deep weariness of being strong for so long. It all came pouring out in a flood of silent, shoulder-shaking sobs. I couldn't stop them. I buried my face in my arms, ashamed of this utter loss of control, this raw, unfiltered display of my own brokenness. I waited for her to pull away, to get awkward and uncomfortable. I waited for the pity. Instead, I felt her shift her weight, moving to sit beside me on the floor. Her hand came to rest on my hair, her fingers gently stroking my head, a gesture of pure, uncomplicated comfort. She didn't speak. She just stayed there, her hand a warm, steady anchor in the storm raging inside me, letting me cry until there were no tears left. When the sobs finally subsided, leaving me empty and trembling, I slowly, hesitantly, rolled onto my side to face her. My face was a mess, tear-stained and blotchy. I probably looked hideous. But the look in Maeve's eyes was not one of disgust or pity. It was one of profound, heart-stopping tenderness. She reached out and gently brushed a stray, damp strand of hair from my cheek. Her fingers were warm against my skin. Her gaze dropped to my lips, and this time, there was no hesitation. The question was there, clear and open, in the soft darkness of her eyes, and with every fiber of my being, I answered it. I leaned in, closing the last few inches between us, and pressed my mouth to hers. Her lips were soft, hesitant at first, a gentle testing of the waters. Then, as I pressed closer, she responded, a soft sigh escaping her as she deepened the kiss. It wasn't a kiss of frantic passion, but of discovery. It was a kiss that tasted of salt from my tears, of wood smoke, and of a deep, soul-shattering relief. It was a kiss that said, I see you. I'm here. I've got you. Her hand moved from my hair to cup my jaw, her thumb stroking my cheek as if she were memorizing the shape of my face. I brought my hand up to her chest, my fingers curling into the soft fabric of her Henley, feeling the steady, strong beat of her heart beneath my palm. It was the most real thing I had felt in years. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. We simply looked at each other in the warm glow of the fire, the unspoken thing between us finally given a name. We didn't move for a long time after the kiss, our foreheads resting against each other, our breath mingling in the cool air. The fire crackled, a soft, intimate soundtrack to the new reality settling around us. My hand was still on her chest, her heart a steady, reassuring rhythm under my palm. Her hand was still cradling my face, her thumb making slow, soothing circles on my cheek. It felt like coming home after a long, brutal journey. "You're back," she murmured, her voice thick. "What about it?" I whispered, not wanting to break the spell. "Is it better?" I considered this. I shifted slightly, testing the muscle that had seized up only an hour before. The sharp, stabbing pain was gone, replaced by a dull, warm ache. But it was more than that. The knot of pain had been inextricably linked to the knot of grief and tension in my soul. Her touch had unraveled them both. "Yes," I said, my voice full of wonder. "It's better." She let out a long, slow breath, a sound of relief. We stayed like that, wrapped in a cocoon of quiet intimacy, until the chill of the room began to creep in. Maeve gently pulled away, though her eyes never left mine. She stood and offered me her hand. I took it, and she easily pulled me to my feet. The world felt different now, tilted on its axis. The cabin wasn't a prison anymore, it was a haven. "You should get into bed," she said softly. "Get warm." The unspoken invitation hung in the air. This time I didn't hesitate. I didn't let the ghosts of the past or the fears for the future stop me. I held her gaze and said, "Will you stay with me?" A slow, beautiful smile spread across her face, the one I had only seen glimpses of before. It lit up her eyes, erasing the last shadows of her own grief. "Yeah," she said, her voice a low, warm promise. "I'll stay." Later, tucked under the heavy quilts in my bed, the darkness of the room was a comfort, not a threat. Maeve lay beside me on her back, her arm a warm, solid weight over my waist, holding me close. We weren't doing anything more than lying there, but it was everything. "Chloe," I said into the darkness, the name no longer tasting like poison. She told me I was too much, too intense, too emotional, that I loved too hard. I felt Maeve's chest rumble with a low sound. "Sounds to me," she said, her voice a deep, steady presence beside my ear. "Like she just didn't know how to love enough." Her words were a key, unlocking the last cage I had built around my heart. I turned in her arms, pressing my face into the warm curve of her neck, breathing in her scent of pine and smoke and safety. She held me tighter, her lips brushing against my hair. We didn't need to say anything more. In the quiet darkness, with the sound of the rain, a distant memory, we had found a common language, a shared map. The immediate problem, the washed-out road, the broken roof, was still there. The future was still a vast, unknown territory. But for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid to face it. Maeve had fixed the roof, but more than that, she had started to fix the part of me I thought was irreparably broken. She had shown me that strength wasn't about being an island. It was about being a shore for someone else to land on. And as I drifted off to sleep, held securely in her arms, I knew I had finally washed ashore. The next morning, the fog had lifted. Bright, clear sunlight streamed through the windows, making dust motes dance in the air. It was a world reborn. Maeve was already up, of course. The smell of coffee was a familiar, comforting welcome. I found her in the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she cracked eggs into a pan. She was wearing one of my oversized, ridiculously soft sweaters that I'd left out, and the sight of her in my clothes, looking so completely at home, sent a warm, possessive thrill through me. She looked up as I entered, and her face broke into that slow, genuine smile. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said. "Morning," I replied, my voice soft. I walked up behind her and wrapped my arms around her waist, resting my cheek against her back, against the soft wool of my sweater. She leaned back into my embrace, her hand coming up to cover mine. We stood like that for a long moment, watching the eggs sizzle in the pan. It was so simple, so domestic, so utterly perfect. "The road crew will probably be up today," she said, her voice losing a little of its lightness. The outside world was coming, whether we were ready for it or not. "I know," I said, my arms tightening around her. We ate breakfast at the small kitchen table, the sunlight warm on our faces. The careful distance of the previous days was a laughable memory. Now our knees brushed under the table, our hands found each other's easily. Our gazes held and communicated entire conversations. After we'd eaten, we walked outside. The air was crisp and clean, the sky a brilliant cloudless blue. The damage from the storm was still evident, the fallen tree, the tarp on the roof, but it no longer seemed menacing. It was just the thing that had happened, the catalyst that had brought us here. "I'll have to get this roof properly patched," I said, looking up at her handiwork. "I know a guy," Maeve said with a smile. but I can handle it myself if you'll let me. The offer was clear. This wasn't just about a one-time repair. It was about coming back. It was about building something. I think I'd like that, I said, my voice steady. I reached for her hand, lacing my fingers through hers. Her grip was firm, solid. We spent the rest of the morning clearing smaller branches from the yard, working together in an easy, comfortable rhythm. Around noon, we heard it, the distant rumble of heavy machinery. The world was returning. Maeve's truck was on the other side of the washout. She would have to leave soon. The knowledge settled between us, a quiet, bittersweet reality. This perfect isolated bubble was about to burst. We stood by the sawn-through section of the oak tree, the path to the outside world now clear. "So," she said, turning to face me, her hands finding my waist. "This is it." "It doesn't have to be," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. The woman who had arrived at this cabin 2 weeks ago would have let her walk away, would have retreated back into her safe, lonely shell. But I wasn't that woman anymore. "Come back for dinner tonight." Maeve's eyes searched mine, looking for any hint of hesitation, of fear. She found none. "I have to finish my rounds," she said, a practical excuse that wasn't an excuse at all. "And I need to check on my own place. But yes, Alara, I'll come back for dinner. I'd like that more than anything." She leaned in and gave me a kiss that was both a promise and a farewell for now. It was a kiss full of hope, a stark contrast to the desperate, searching kiss of the night before. This was a beginning. When she pulled away, she rested her forehead against mine. "The choice," she said softly, "is to trust that the new structure is stronger than the old one that fell." A little while later, I watched her walk down the lane, her stride just as confident as it had been the first time I saw her. But this time, she turned and waved before she disappeared from view. I waved back, a real, genuine smile on my face. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't an empty silence anymore. It was filled with the echo of her laugh, the memory of her touch. I had come here to be alone, to heal from a woman who had taught me that love was a thing to be feared. But in the heart of a storm, another woman had shown up and taught me that a fallen tree isn't just an ending. It's a chance to clear a new path and let the light in. I had a roof to fix and a novel to write. But for the first time in a long, long time, I knew the story would have a happy ending. I was finally ready to write it. Have you ever had to choose between the safety of a well-known solitude and the terrifying, beautiful risk of letting someone new in? If you've ever stood at that crossroads, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this story and subscribe for more.